All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first panel of the day. I am Gia Vason. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director of ZEV Market Development at GoBiz, and I'll be your moderator for this panel on the statewide perspective, where we'll discuss various efforts by the state agencies and utilities, and we'll get a little bit of a private sector perspective as well, but in this effort in determining and meeting the demands of the growing zero-emission vehicle market. So we heard some great remarks from the chair and the commissioners and Tyson in the previous session. And I think that, there's no doubt that we have a big task ahead of us, and one that's full of opportunities too. It's going to take all of us. So we have to continue to work together constructively to move the ZEV market forward and to scale ultimately to 100%. We already have a lot of coordination going on that's been ongoing for years, from the staff level to the leadership levels. And Tyson previously mentioned the ZEV market development strategy, which is aimed at helping to further organize and focus the various stakeholders, both in the public and private sector. We also heard about Governor Newsom's California Comeback Plan, and Chair Randolph gave a great overview of the last session, and we heard some other remarks around that. So it includes, as was said, a big ZEV package that can really help the public and private sector investments work together even better, I think. So we also need to remember the importance of leveraging both battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell electric technologies and focusing on applying them for the use cases where they're best suited. So I'm very excited about our excellent panelists today, who will be able to provide a well-rounded perspective with regard to our technologies. As far as the structure for this hour, we'll hear briefly from each of our speakers, and then we'll move into a Q&A for the remainder of our session. So why don't we get started? Our first panelist is Annalisa Bevan. She's the Zero-Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Specialist at California Air Resources Board. She oversees CARB's zero-emission fueling infrastructure activities and facilitates coordination with government agencies and stakeholders to ensure California has the necessary infrastructure to enable the transition to ZEVs and equipment, zero-emission equipment, across the light and medium and heavy-duty vehicle and off-road equipment markets. So with that, Annalisa, please.
Gia, I appreciate the opportunity to join this panel. California has a critical need to transition our mobile sources to zero emission. With 7 out of 10 of the cities with the worst air quality in the nation, California must act to reduce emissions from mobile sources to achieve our health-based air quality standards. And we're already experiencing the impacts of climate change, with mobile sources a primary contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. We must do all we can to reduce emissions from those sectors. When the governor signed Executive Order N9720, CARB staff weren't in a panic of, oh wow, how are we going to put programs in place to achieve those goals of 100% transition? Instead, we looked to what we were already working on to achieve our air quality and climate goals and said, now everyone is hearing what we've been saying needs to happen to reach our targets. Infrastructure is critical to the transition to 100% ZEVs. Without fuel, customers and fleets cannot seriously contemplate operating ZEVs. We used to talk about the chicken and egg issue of which should come first, the infrastructure or the vehicles. And when the market was first starting out for light duty vehicles, that was a somewhat legitimate debate. Fuel providers wanted confidence that vehicles would come to use their fuel before they would commit to building, and vehicle providers wouldn't commit to bringing ZEVs until they had confidence that infrastructure would be there to fuel them. But we've moved to a new phase in the market. Technology is proven. Vehicle and equipment market deployments are happening here and around the world regularly. With a global recognition of the inevitable transition to zero-emission technologies, the rollout is clear and the infrastructure needs to come now. Recognizing that, CARB's role is now to help map out how the market will grow, thus enabling the planning and development of the infrastructure network that will support each mobile sector. A lot of our planning efforts are rooted in articulating how California will meet its health-based air quality standards and climate change goals. We use planning efforts like the Mobile Source Strategy, the Scoping Plan, and California's State Implementation Plan to map out the emission reductions needed and the subsequent actions that need to be taken to reach our air quality standards and climate goals. Modeling how the mobile source sectors need to change to meet our targets sets the stage for all the programs that then work in concert to achieve them. Everything from incentives and grant programs to regulations. And this modeling also sends a signal about infrastructure needs. And as the programs that drive the market and are developed and implemented, we're messaging the ZEV rollout schedules that are then the roadmap for when and how much infrastructure will be needed. The roadmap can be used in multiple ways. State, local, and federal infrastructure funding programs can calculate the support needed to launch the market, and infrastructure providers can calculate the business case through utilization, thus launching the business model for zero-emission infrastructure, including development of innovative services and solutions. CARB also plays a role in facilitating infrastructure for ZEVs. We know the technology have the relationships with the vehicle and equipment manufacturers and can help bridge between the vehicle needs and what the infrastructure planners and developers deliver. We've been doing this with building standards, with connector and access standards in the light duty vehicle space, and with network assessments for light duty hydrogen stations. And we stand prepared to support the actions of our sister agencies as they shift priorities towards ZEV infrastructure. We supply the why, air quality and climate targets, and we supply the when, modeling and analysis. Finally, CARB is committed to reaching the goals of the governor's executive order. We must in order to address our health-based air quality standards and climate targets needed for our state. In driving a ZEV market, we stand ready to help our sister agencies, vehicle and equipment manufacturers, and infrastructure providers as much as we can with the development of the zero-emission infrastructure needed to support the market. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Annalisa. Our next panelist is Michelle Vader. She's the supervisor of the Freight and Transit Unit in the Advanced Fuels and Vehicle Technologies Office at the California Energy Commission, which is in the Fuels and Transportation Division in the California Energy Commission. And her unit's responsibilities include implementing activities that support the demonstration and commercial deployment of advanced freight and transit technologies. Michelle.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gia. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Vader. I'm the supervisor of the Freight and Transit Unit in the Fuels and Transportation Division of the California Energy Commission. I work with the Energy Commission's Clean Transportation Program, which invests about $100 million annually to support innovation and accelerate the deployment of advanced transportation and fuel technologies. There have been a lot of exciting things happening in the medium duty and heavy duty space recently, and I'm just going to highlight some of the work the Energy Commission's been doing. So in the Clean Transportation Program, we have put an increased focus on medium and heavy duty, on the medium and heavy duty sector, because these vehicles make up a small percentage of the total vehicles on the road, but are responsible for significantly higher emissions in the state when compared to light duty vehicles. So under our proposed Clean Transportation Program investment plan, we anticipate nearly $115 million in funding for medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle infrastructure over the next 2.5 years. And if additional funding becomes available from the state or federal level, we anticipate using this funding for zero emission vehicle infrastructure. And in the past few months, we have announced funding awards in a number for the demonstration of hydrogen marine and rail applications at ports. The Clean Transportation Program provided funding for supporting hydrogen infrastructure for the Sierra Northern Hydrogen Locomotive Project at the Port of West Sacramento. So this infrastructure will be capable of supporting a switcher locomotive in addition to on-road medium and heavy-duty vehicles. Earlier this year, we announced 4 awards for our zero-emission transit fleet infrastructure deployment solicitation, which scale conversion of transit bus fleets to zero-emission vehicles. And additionally, we proposed 3 awards for the medium and heavy-duty category for our bus fit solicitation, with the purpose to demonstrate innovative electric charging solutions and to accelerate the successful commercial deployment of those solutions. We also recently announced 2 awards for the zero-emission drayage truck and infrastructure pilot project, which was the CEC's first joint solicitation with our sister agency, the California Air Resources Board. Under the solicitation, over $44 million was available to fund the large-scale deployment of zero-emission on-road Class 8 drayage and regional haul trucks and the necessary zero-emission fueling infrastructure needed for service operation. And to close out the recent awards, the CEC recently launched the nation's first incentive project for zero-emission truck and bus infrastructure called Energize Commercial Vehicles. Energize stands for Energy Infrastructure Incentives for Vehicles. This is a block grant project that will be designed to speed up the deployment and installation of infrastructure in order to provide more accessible and reliable electric charging and hydrogen refueling to future medium and heavy duty zero emission fleets. We hope to begin accepting applications for this block grant project later this year. So I've mentioned a couple of hydrogen projects already, and I wanted to highlight additional Energy Commission efforts in hydrogen refueling infrastructure that are helping to meet California's ZEV goals. To date, 47 hydrogen stations are operational, and it's anticipated that 179 will be operational by 2026, which will exceed the 100 station goal set by AB8 and nearly meet Governor Brown's Executive Order B-48-18, which established the goal of achieving 200 hydrogen stations by 2025. Of these stations, 13 stations will be capable of fueling medium and heavy duty vehicles, which will help to accelerate the deployment of commercial fuel cell electric trucks and buses. Aside from funding infrastructure, the CEC is also conducting a number of analyses to assist California in addressing barriers and better meeting its ZEV goals. SB 1000 directs the CEC to assess whether plug-in electric vehicle charging infrastructure is disproportionately deployed by population density, geographical area, or population income level. Staff released its first report in December of 2020 and will continue to conduct infrastructure deployment assessments. Additionally, the CEC, in collaboration with CARB and the CPUC, has published the AB 2127 report, which considers the current status of charging infrastructure as well as the future need for it. So the report covers CEC tracking of current and planned installations. It also covers several quantitative charging infrastructure demand models, including heavy load, which covers medium and heavy duty electrification. Future analysis will cover off-road, port, and airport electrification. These assessments will be very important to addressing the key bottlenecks for meeting California's ZEV goals and increasing access to EV infrastructure for all. And lastly, just one pretty cool thing that has been launched by the CEC's Energy Assessments Division is the Zero-Emission Vehicle Dashboard, which can be found through the CEC's website. This dashboard contains data and information about EV chargers statewide, including level 1, 2, and DC fast chargers, in addition to CEC-funded school buses and school bus chargers and hydrogen refueling stations in California. The dashboard is interactive, and you can search for locations by county, metropolitan statistical area, or zip code. The CEC is working to update this tool to include medium and heavy duty ZEV infrastructure as it becomes online and available. So those are just some of the efforts the CEC has been working on in relation to the medium and heavy duty zero emission infrastructure. I'm really looking forward to talking more about the continued infrastructure progress and collaboration efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Great comments. Next, we'll hear from Yulia Schmidt. She's an advisor on the transportation electrification to Commissioner Cliff Rechtschaffen, who we heard from in the previous panel at the California Public Utilities Commission. She's been advising the commissioner since 2017, and her portfolio includes integrated resource planning and electric system reliability, general rate cases and rate design, along with natural gas issues. Yulia, please.
Thank you very much, Gia, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I hope most of you heard Commissioner Rechtschaffen's remarks this morning, and I hope to build off of them and provide a little more information about the CPUC's role in transportation electrification infrastructure, and how we see ourselves moving forward in utility regulation in this space. I'm also very happy to have followed Michelle from the CEC, because we actually use a major analysis that the CEC has done once and will update every year as a jumping off point for figuring out how much TE infrastructure the utility should build. And that is the analysis the CEC has done pursuant to AB 2127. It is a statewide infrastructure needs assessment. We heard a little bit about it this morning, and it was published just recently. And it and beyond what we think California will need in terms of infrastructure across the state for transportation electrification, of course, including and actually really focusing on medium and heavy duty sectors. So what we have proposed at the CPC, as Commissioner Rexhoff mentioned this morning, is an overarching vision of how to plan for the utility portion of the infrastructure going forward. And that is our transportation electrification framework, which we have issued in draft form, plan to revise and adopt hopefully before the end of this year. The first part of it, we actually plan to adopt sooner than that. We mailed a proposed decision yesterday on a part of that framework. In short, what we hope to do is take the CEC's infrastructure assessment, the AB 2127 report, any other inputs that we think are relevant for utilities to figure out what their portion of needed infrastructure is. And those might include information from local air districts governing air quality. It certainly includes car vehicle regulations and also some utility planning, including for the distribution grid, and determining what the utility's role in overall infrastructure should be. And then once those plans are adopted, utilities will be filing specific ideas for specific programs that we will authorize funding for to move ahead with transportation electrification and the infrastructure needed. That being said, though, we're certainly not starting this effort from scratch. We have authorized $1.5 billion in TE infrastructure development specifically for the 3 major and the 3 small investor-owned utilities. About half of that is specific to the medium and heavy-duty sector. And that includes just a variety of subsectors within that. Just to name a few examples, every one of the major electric utilities has programs in some or all of these areas. These are public transit and school buses, big area of emphasis for us, both for equity and air quality reasons. For class 2 through 8 trucks, that includes delivery vehicles and drayage. Port equipment, that includes electric forklifts and other. And we actually just revised our definition of electric vehicle recently to include off-road equipment, so that the same rules and programs can apply to off-road vehicles. Commissioner Rexhoff touched on another important component of what the utilities can provide for medium and heavy-duty transportation electrification, and that is rates. Large customers in particular are very sensitive to costs and fuel costs, and we know that they consider that carefully in making their decision to electrify. So we have directed the utilities to provide rates that can make it very cost effective to transition to electricity as a source of fuel. Each of the utilities now offers a commercial electric vehicle rate, often several. Each of those rates provides fairly steeply differentiated time of use periods, meaning that if those fleets are able to charge, for example, at nighttime, it will be much cheaper than purchasing gasoline or diesel for those same vehicles. And in addition, we're working on even more sophisticated rates, including dynamic rates that customers can take advantage of, especially if they have software or hardware that manages their charging and further reduce their fueling costs. We will talk about vehicle grid integration potentially a little bit later, but I did want to do a quick plug, no pun intended, for a workshop we're holding just 2 days from today on June 4th. As part of our vehicle grid integration pilot, the utilities have brought forth a range of proposals, many of which medium and heavy duty vehicles can participate in. And so we're holding a workshop to gather stakeholder feedback on the 4th. On those proposals, and we would love to hear from folks such as those on this call who have real world experience with electrifying these vehicles and then keeping them charged to make sure that we design our vehicle grid integration pilots in a way that really encourages participation and makes the most sense for participants.
Excellent. Thank you, Yulia. Okay, now we're going to move in. And we're going to hear from Eileen Tan next. She's the Executive Director of the California Electric Transportation Coalition and Electric Transportation Community Development Corporation. We know as CalETC, most of us, right? And her role there at CalETC is electric transportation as a means to reach California's clean air goals. Eileen, please.
Thank you, Gia, and I appreciate being invited to this panel today. I think one of the things that I wanted to just start by saying is that we often forget that the infrastructure backbone for electricity fuel for trucks and buses, it exists already. As electricity fuel is ubiquitous. Every household, every business has access to electricity. And the grid, which supplies that electricity to our homes and our businesses, is one of the modern engineering feats of our time. So our challenge really is to connect trucks and heavy-duty vehicles and buses to the grid, which is true for any new application that needs electricity, whether it be your swimming pool or your hot tub or your refrigerator. It is kind of a different transportation option. Electric vehicles and electric trucks and buses are exceptional in a lot of ways, and this is one of them. They're great to drive. They're fun to drive. The trucks are a lot of fun, and it was really fun to see some of the new trucks roll out by many of our medium and heavy duty vehicle manufacturers, whether they be battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. I do want to say that the other thing to recognize is that, and Yulia mentioned this, for investor-owned utilities, it's also true for municipal or publicly owned utilities in that they are economically regulated. So every utility is a part of its community, and equity is at the forefront of many of the decisions and investments that the utilities make, whether it's providing special rates for low-income customers of theirs or for truck fleets that need to charge during certain times. That is also true of the public utilities as well. And it is unique to electricity because it allows fleets and electricity users to predict their fuel costs well out into the future, knowing that we have these entities that are economically regulated. And that is a big benefit of shifting from something like oil, where the price is completely unpredictable and has huge upswings and downswings that are dependent on a lot of factors that humans have no control over. The cost of electricity tends to stay rather predictable in California in particular. I also want to say that when we connect these vehicles to the grid, and there's been numerous studies, including a few done by the California Electric Transportation Coalition with independent consultants, the benefits to everybody who uses electricity are demonstrable. So whether or not you drive an electric vehicle, the added efficiency, resiliency benefits, cost benefits to the grid flow through to all people who use electricity. So that is a uniqueness, again, of this particular fuel, where we're all sort of interconnected through a grid that is ubiquitous in our society. I do want to say that the costs, and Yulia mentioned, and the Energy Commission as well with the public utilities, that there is an economic regulation, but the costs to connecting to the grid are largely, especially for a truck fleet or a bus fleet, are due to two main factors. And the first, which is the most important, is what do you need to do to upgrade your connection so that you can connect your truck to the source of its fuel. In this case, it would be electricity. And in some cases, the system is already in place, and all you need to do is put in the external charging infrastructure the service providers can provide to you. But in most cases, there will be some back of the meter adjustments that will be made, whether it's new conduit, whether you may even need to install a new substation if we're talking about very, very large fleets. And that requires for fleets and trucks, people who are purchasing these trucks, some planning. So those costs will vary, and it's going to be really important to have collaboration between those that are purchasing the trucks, the fleet, so to speak, and the buses, and their utility, whether that be a municipal utility or an investor-owned utility. So that's going to be essential. The other thing that is often not considered, sort of structure of the regulation. So this one's for Annalisa. The clean truck rule is a fleet rule. It is not a segmented or beachhead approach like CalSTART often pursues and CalETC supports. It is a fleet rule. So because of that, and the fleet, the alternative clean fleet rule or advanced clean fleet rule is going to mirror, presumably, the truck rule. And so it's not as easy to predict where these trucks are going to be. Now that's both a positive. There's no question that there's flexibility and there's opportunities there, but it does create some challenges, and that this collaboration between the fleets and the government, with its incentive programs and its collaborative, its ability to bring people together as they've done today, it makes it more important. So we're going to need, my main message as I take up my 5 minutes and then turn it, I think Edison is next, or is going to come up with some very specific examples of what one of the leading utilities is doing electrification. My main message here is that this forum today is really important, in that the challenges to the fleets and the utilities are really bringing them together, as well as the other private sector, the automakers, the electric vehicle service providers, all of whom share this commitment to a state goal that's 100% ZEV. There's a huge amount of support within California, within its businesses, certainly within its utilities, to shift to a zero-emission transportation future. But there is going to need to be an ongoing collaborative connectedness between the fleets, the infrastructure providers like the EVSPs, the people who provide the infrastructure, the utilities, and government. And there is an EV charging infrastructure strike force that has been created, and that's one opportunity for this sort of public-private partnership going forward. But another is an opportunity like today, where government has convened us all to have a conversation about how do we make sure that these medium and heavy-duty zero-emission trucks can access the fuel they need, and that it's affordable, and that we do this in a seamless way so we accomplish our shared goals. So I guess as I turn it over to Gia, will tell us who the next speaker is. I just want to say that this is a really exciting time, and Gia said it. And the earlier panel said it too. The technology's here today. There's hydrogen, there's electricity, there's fuel available that's zero emission. We can do this. And there are opportunities that we don't even realize yet as we move to zero emission that go beyond public health, that go to the very foundation of our economic well-being. So we have a tremendous opportunity here as we shift off oil to a zero emission future. And I think I see only opportunities, and there are challenges, but they themselves create an opportunity. So I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel today, and I'll turn it back over to Gia. So thank you.
Thank you, Eileen, so much. And you are correct. Our next speaker is Dana Cabell. She is the Director of Integrated System Strategy for Southern California Edison. She and her team are responsible for bringing a strategic and integrated focus to system planning through the translation of SCE's objectives and initiatives into system strategies, while ensuring SCE's transmission and distribution is the system is safe and reliable, resilient, clean, and affordable. And this is done through grid investment decisions, renewable and energy storage, resource integration, grid modernization, resiliency, and carbon neutral electric grid efforts. So please, Dana.
Great, thanks, Gia. And good morning, everybody. Before I get to a little disclaimer, I would like to first state that I may discuss topics relating to open rate setting proceedings at the CPUC. Of course, Yulia is a co-panelist, and Commissioner Rechtschaffen provided opening remarks. But if other decisions apologize. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, you were breaking up a little bit.
Oh, shoot, I apologize. I don't know what's wrong with my internet service since I am connected via Ethernet cable, so I'm not sure what's going on. So let me start over. Yeah, because I need to do a little disclaimer first before I get into my opening remarks. So I'd like to first state that I may discuss topics relating to open rate setting proceedings at the PUC. Of course, Yulia is a co-panelist, and Commissioner Rechtschaffen provided opening remarks earlier. But if other decision makers at the PUC are online or listening in, please email me at dana.cabell@se.com. That's dana.cabbell@se.com. And let me know at the conclusion of the panel so that SE can take the appropriate steps to comply with any ex parte rules governing conference presentations like this one. All right, so I really appreciate being here this morning. Back in 2019, SE published its Pathway 2045 roadmap for enabling a clean energy future for California. SE's vision within that roadmap really provided what needs to change so the state can achieve its greenhouse goals. So Pathway 2045 laid out a three-prong approach, which with one of the prongs pointed to the need for at least 75% of all vehicles in California to be zero-emission vehicles by 2045. Recently, we provided a corresponding vision of how to evolve our electric grid, and that was laid out in our 2020 Reimagining the Grid white paper, really reinforcing the significant role that transportation electrification will play in achieving a clean energy future for California. Reimagining the Grid presented SE's vision for providing an electric grid that enables the efficient integration of clean resources while also adapting other needs driven by customers and climate change. SE is ready to play our part to help get EVs into California's roads. We are helping our customers today to meet their fleet transition needs while planning for the grid needs of tomorrow at a system level broadly. SE has been supporting our commercial customers build out of charging infrastructure through our Charge Ready Transport program, supporting the electrification of approximately 8,500 vehicles over a 5-year period. We've responded to the need of more upfront customer engagement in the fleet electrification journey by creating a medium and heavy duty support team that's really here to help with those customers to understand the planning process and to come in and to connect into the grid. We're also sharing our grid capacity map through our public portal that's typically has been used for DER planning, the DER external portal, or as we kindly like to call it, Dr. PEP. Really, it helps inform our customers on the optimal grid locations for at-scale charging infrastructure. So that's available for anybody to dig in and look to see where is the best location for some of these larger fleet interconnections. We're also enhancing our forecasting and grid planning tools and processes so we can better assess the grid impacts and needs to support the medium duty, heavy duty EV fleet needs. There are often questions on the topic of grid capacity. Will there be enough capacity and time to meet the growing EV demand? The answer broadly is yes. We have a good head start, but there's still work ahead of us. Important to note, utilities can't do it alone. I think you've been hearing this from the other panelists. We need partners within the public and private sectors. The utilities we have one very important piece of the puzzle, ensuring the grid is ready through developing and expanding the grid. but it's only one piece of the infrastructure puzzle. Our other partners, namely fleet owners and operators, hold the other puzzle pieces. Customers can help SCE identify short, medium, and long-term EV and fleet transition plans so that we can grow our infrastructure in step with your needs, with the customer's growing EV fleet. Our other very important partners are all the state partners that are represented here on this panel. We need to also help with their help, providing insights into these factors of where, when, and how EVs will charge, and reducing the uncertainty will give us all the confidence we need to collectively plan ahead, invest in, and build what's really necessary to support this very important development of ZEVs. So I'm going to stop there. I want to thank you all for inviting me to join this prestigious panel and to participate in the discussion, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Right, we're going to turn to Nico Baukamp. He's the Technical Program Manager at the California Fuel Cell Partnership, and he's the project lead of member project teams that are intended to solve technical and informational challenges related to fueling heavy-duty fuel cell electric vehicles with hydrogen, as well as road mapping for passenger vehicles, transit buses, and medium and heavy-duty trucks. So, Nico, please.
Thank you, Gia. Can you hear me all right? Assume that's a yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay, double checking. So thank you, Gia, and also thank you for GoBiz for taking on the organization of this infrastructure panel. It's much appreciated that you took the lead on this and brought it together with the context of the ZEV mandate for cars, which is really in the back of our minds, and the many lessons learned over the last 20 or 30 years, and that all in our back pocket. That resulted in the currently existing light-duty ZEV fueling infrastructure. And also the 2030 goals for this market, such as the 1.5 million public chargers and the 1,000 hydrogen retail stations, and this timeline. But at the same time, that makes us realize that the timeline for the targeted number of medium and heavy-duty trucks is relatively short for a vehicle fleet transition. So therefore, as mentioned by previous speakers, we need really an all-hands-on-deck approach that includes all medium and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicle technologies. And because of that, hydrogen and heavy-duty fuel cell electric vehicles, both trucks and transit buses, and we'll hear more about buses later this afternoon, I think, they're part of the equation. And as a note, currently 40 to 90% of hydrogen as a transportation fuel dispensed is coming from renewable resources. And that's often a question that is asked. And I think that was also one of the questions that was sent to us when folks registered for this panel, for this forum. And also to make it even more challenging, and I'm just pointing this out, I'll get to some solutions as well, is that the one-to-one replacement is really needed for a no compromise solution when you compare it to diesel and CNG, and that's really what we're looking at. And this sets the bar really high, but this is what's really what the majority of the fleet operators is looking for. Going back to the context of light duty, and the tie to that, there is definitely a tie to that. So there are many lessons learned on the infrastructure side, but also on the vehicle R&D side. And light duty ZEVs really have served as an opportunity to amortize the cost of R&D. And this is now allows things to be going a little faster on the heavy duty side, with the bar in mind, of course, that it's set high for the one-to-one replacement. The other point is that the existing fueling infrastructure is really triggered to success. I think we heard that earlier, but I can tell you that for the hydrogen side, I've been told that industry is ready to go and commit to invest billions of dollars for this, but it's really waiting for a little bit of clearer and stronger market signals from the state, such as a long-term commitment to infrastructure to build the market. And that shouldn't withhold us, but that means there is still more work to do. And going back to specifically to the fleets that operate these trucks, and I'm getting a little bit into the accessibility and availability of infrastructure point of things, also learned from the light duty side of things, as our context. So for larger players in this fleet operation space, They typically have newer vehicles and they have more on-site fueling. Smaller players, on the other hand, are relying more on older vehicles and rely more on public infrastructure that's accessible. With regard to this accessibility, that's really a critical point for commercial fueling or commercial ZEV rollouts, as well as the availability of real estate to facilitate infrastructure implementation. And I've already said these implementation timelines for trucks are challenging to achieve this rapid transition. But we do have something in our back pocket as well, and I want to compliment GoBiz for this, and that's your permitting guideline for light-duty ZEV infra. And I think that's a good place to start with regard to permitting and making things go faster. And now we need to apply it to heavy-duty or medium and heavy-duty infrastructure implementation. And note there, medium-duty can often rely on more technology from light-duty than heavy-duty, because it's just a different world and how that works. And you can also see that in your local town if you see where, for example, Amazon medium-duty delivery trucks fuel. They often go to regular gas stations. The other thing we need is a shared industry government vision and commitment. And that was also pointed out by several of the previous speakers. As a California Fuel Cell Partnership, we wrote a vision for light-duty vehicles. And our members currently are now working on a 2035 vision for Class 8 fuel cell trucks. This includes tens of thousands of heavy-duty fuel cell electric trucks, as well as 100 till 200 heavy-duty hydrogen truck stations spread over the state, and maybe a little bit more emphasis on the urbanized areas and ports, for example. And as part of this visioning of between industry and government, it is essential to assess self-sufficiency as well for the different zero-emission fuel infrastructures. The benefit of this is that it gives everyone an indication to when industry can actually be self-sufficient and operate sustainably, and does not have to rely on direct government funding anymore. And that's good for budgeting purposes and for a list of other benefits. And of course, that still requires some policies in place that benefit decarbonized fuels over current liquid carbonized fuels. So really, in summary, there are three high-level areas that will lead to success. We need an all-hands-on deck approach that includes all zero-emission vehicle technologies. We need the existence of a fueling infrastructure to trigger success, and we need a shared industry government vision and commitment. And then, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead on going a little bit out of the box. We often talk about innovative solutions for the different areas, and I think I heard Annalisa and maybe Yulia and Michelle talk about the commitments of the state and what the state is looking at, as well as what the commissioners mentioned earlier today, is that how do we get this going? One idea that I've not heard much about is potentially using the vehicle sharing concept. It's well known for light duty vehicles. It happens a lot in regions that have less space for cars, that have large populations that cannot afford a car, or because of the available real estate cannot park their cars. So this could also be done for drayage trucks, for example. So like car sharing, these trucks would be made available on a pay for time used model, instead of like assuming that operators will purchase these vehicles, because really in the drayage space, for example, this population of vehicles consists of older vehicles, and livelihood of many depends on it. And for that reason, they are less likely to make the jump to zero emission technologies. And so this may be a way to allow some level of comfort, not to immediately scrap their truck, but first try it out and see how it works. And that also allows for them to keep the cost within check and not have to jump through all the hoops that are currently in place to acquire one of these trucks, and with that avoid some of the risks. So I'll leave it with that. I'm looking forward to the discussion. It looks like we have a few minutes left, a good number of minutes. So curious to hear what kind of questions were asked. Gia, back to you.
Thank you, Nico. So great. So we have about a half an hour here to get into some discussion. So we pose a few questions, and we have some that were received through registration when participants registered, and we have some that have been coming in the Q&A. So in terms of our first question, There have been several questions around ensuring adequate, resilient grid capacity and transmission, and the panelists did touch on this, but maybe we can just dig in a little bit more, and maybe we'll tackle this one as a group, so we'll just kind of go around. We'll start with the agencies, and not that you need to repeat yourself, but maybe just having us all kind of respond to this in a group will help kind of condense this topic, which has come up a lot. So for the agencies, maybe we can just talk about, what are the main things that are being done to ensure that enough power is in place, and that the grid has the systems in place to deliver the power or or the fuel. And also then maybe we can think about anything in terms of including ensuring affordability, which Eileen talks about a little bit. But let's start with the agencies, if you want to just respond to that, and then we'll move to the other panelists.
I can jump into you. Yeah. So on the utility side, first of all, I see this question sort of twofold. One is, how will we be sure that there's just enough power generated in the state to serve what we expect to be increased electric demand in the future with the electrification of vehicles? And I should add also buildings and other areas of demand. And secondly, how will we ensure that the distribution grid is capable of handling folks where they want to plug in? So firstly, to address that first half, the CPUC has a broad effort called integrated resource planning that we undertake biannually, but in reality is a continuing effort that forecasts out the electric demand. Now we actually use the CEC forecast out 10 years and kind of in more detail closer to now. And then we ensure that there are enough power generating facilities on the grid to serve that demand. Overwhelmingly in the future, those facilities will be not power plants as we think of them conventionally, as in fossil fueled or natural gas plants. They will be non-emitting power plants, and that might be a combination of renewables and storage, many other technologies, geothermal, long duration storage. We have actually issued a proposed decision in integrated resource planning, I want to say just a week or two ago, that addresses a lot of these questions, including what kinds of technologies will be used to serve demand in the future. All that is to say, the lights will stay on, and we expect to have the power we need, both in the short and long term. And we are, of course, accounting for the increased demand for transportation electrification. That's actually been modeled in quite a bit of detail. And then the second part of the question, how do we know there will be power where folks want to plug in? That is something that we will definitely be looking to our utilities to carefully map out and forecast when they're proposing the various transportation electrification programs. So we've already outlined in our transportation electrification framework that we expect that the capacity of the distribution grid, for example, will be carefully considered as it dovetails with where we expect electrification to happen. And that might be in ports or where medium and heavy duty fleets are charging. It might include public transit agencies and so on. And I think Dana has already touched on the fact that the utilities already have fairly detailed, I believe, circuit level maps of where there is distribution grid capacity. And we expect to integrate those with our transportation electrification efforts so that a fleet owner, for example, will just be able to pull up a map of their neighborhood and their circuit and immediately see if there's, for example, plenty of distribution capacity, and that means they can probably file an interconnection request and have it serviced quite quickly, or perhaps that circuit is quite full and they can expect that there might need to be some upgrades made before they're approved to plug in.
Excellent, thank you. And so I want to turn a little bit, unless there's other comments from the agencies, but maybe we'll just turn a little bit to kind of same question to Dana and or Eileen around, how you see this going forward and ensuring this kind of, that we have what Yulia was addressing, these kind of two aspects of it, that we have enough power and that we have the right kind of ability to supply it.
Sure, I didn't know if I'll jump in. No, and I appreciate and completely echo what Yulia was kind kind of her remarks in answering this question. Kind of addressing those concerns and ensuring that we do have enough capacity is really paramount to incentivize and to meet the goals that we have. And so to be able to do that, what we need from at the utility is also a way, and I think Yulia touched on this too, is predicting the EV load impacts and predicting the grid needs. And those are challenging. And we need to understand kind of the unique challenge for system planning. Because as opposed to our traditional sources of load growth, these EVs are mobile. So the grid demands can freely migrate throughout the system. And so to confidently plan the system to accommodate large-scale transportation electrification, particularly with medium-duty, heavy-duty EVs, it's really critical to know how many fleet vehicles will be deployed by when, where they will charge, and how they will charge. Because those are all the inputs that my power system planners and the other utilities power system planners need to know to be able to run the assessments and to understand, yes, there is capacity on the distribution grid and maybe even ultimately our transmission grid, depending on how large these installations are. Those are the inputs that we need to be able to run the assessments and to determine, yes, we do have capacity, and there is some impact, and we'll need to reinforce the infrastructure to be able to accept this load. So it's really that active partnership that I talked about before with the fleet owners and the operators, really to proactively, for us as power system planners, to understand the plans and the considerations about the deployment and all the associated energy use and impacts. And then we can, assess those impacts, advise any mitigating strategies, and help in the provision of the infrastructure, and really preparing the grid to accommodate the future loads. So I think the broad message here is we all got to work together on this so that we are able to build out the grid in the appropriate places to be able to integrate and interconnect this new load that's coming to us. So I didn't know if Eileen had anything additional.
The only thing I would quickly add is that our state has spent so much capital, if you will, but that's politically and economically, on efficiency. And so right now we have a super efficient, our buildings, our homes tend to be very, very efficient, all our appliances. So what we have right now is overcapacity of some of our renewable resources like solar and wind. So I think the interesting thing about this opportunity that electrification of the transportation sector brings to us is perhaps we can utilize that solar and wind overcapacity in our transportation sector rather than curtailing it, which is what we're doing right now. And that, again, I do think that the nice thing about this transition is it's just going to take time. And so we have time to do this right. And as Dana said, we need not just time, but we also need collaboration. And that's why forums like these are really important. And we need to really bring in the fleets so that the medium and duty vehicle purchasers feel confident that there's no lack of confidence that when they buy this truck, they'll be able to fuel it and that the fuel will be affordable and almost certainly, in many cases, renewable.
So before we get to the next question, I do want to just give Nico an opportunity to say, think about the hydrogen fuel cell space. How is this sort of the same or different? How are we thinking about
I am guessing you're talking to me, but I didn't completely hear what you were asking because you broke up. So I heard hydrogen, and that's when I kind of tried to read it between the lines.
We've been talking about, hearing about. Is it coming through okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So just talking about ensuring that there's sufficient, electricity and that it's being distributed and recognized. And so just thinking about the hydrogen side, how are we thinking about about this, how is it the same or different? So, again, like fuel cell technology.
Okay, I'm going to read a little bit between the lines because you broke up again.
Sorry.
So I'll try to help you out. So I think I heard that you were trying. What I heard was that you were trying to establish a connection between electricity and hydrogen. Is that about right?
Yeah, just same or different. Or how are we thinking about that?
Okay, so I think they're complementary, really, between the two of them. Whereas Eileen pointed out, for example, stranded assets. So you're not always able to use that renewable content that comes out of the grid. So that may be an opportunity to make hydrogen and not lose that, either stored for transportation fuel purposes, or at least not lose it and use it in other ways. There are many opportunities there, but I think hydrogen could use or function as well as an opportunity to make the grid function more optimal. Whereas occasionally there's overload and that needs to be shed as well, or there is not enough power that happens as well. There are many projects in the works, and that's mostly focused on electrolysis as the technology that would make the bridge between the two. But they're obviously for hydrogen. It can be used made in many other ways and used in different ways as well. Fuel cells is one way, and we're talking about zero-emission transportation. In that regards, it would be great to use it in fuel cell vehicles, but there are also stationary solutions as well that we can count out. And I also want to point out that we're really we're in really unique times as well, because we have to consider how much we want to continue to use or continue to recognize the silos that exist that previously existed for good purposes, to make sure things could be optimal better, like separating transportation fuels from stationary applications and using the grid for residential and commercial purposes. But now on this, with regards to transportation and zero emission, these can be brought together, and we have to bring these two together and break down those silos, at least make openings in it so the two can interact and it's not completely disconnected. And there are opportunities back and forth between hydrogen and electricity as a fuel, but even broader than that, also the production side of things. So maybe that answered your question, but I didn't hear your complete question, but I just add that to the discussion.
Thank you. How's it coming through now? Is it okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I'm getting some sounds too, so apologies. Yeah,
go
it's
for
like
it.
a mic somewhere or something. Okay. And now? Okay. Great. Okay. So Eileen shared a little bit about equity in her remarks, and I want to dig in on this a little bit more. So what are the barriers to equitable deployment of charging infrastructure, and how are we looking to address these barriers? So I think maybe we can start with agency. I don't know if Michelle, if you have a comment there, or Lisa to start.
Well, I can start. I think in terms of placement and implementation of infrastructure in an equitable fashion, I'm not sure I can address barriers per se, but I think there are certainly lots of things to think about. Especially in the heavy duty side, we have opportunities where we may be replacing a diesel or CNG refueling depot, which is contributing to increased emissions in a community, with a zero emission fueling depot, which will have definite benefits. But we can't assume that it completely erases all of the cons to the pro and con analysis of a fueling depot. It doesn't eliminate heavy traffic, heavy vehicle traffic in the neighborhood. So I think it's really important that as we're transitioning to zero emission infrastructure fueling sites, that we are working with communities to understand the pros and cons and the priorities of communities and the fleets figure out how to do this in a way which is really benefiting everybody. There could be increased opportunities, especially in transit, if we're doing, say, a distributed fueling depot network that in fact increases access to transit throughout communities by concentrating more bus service in more communities. So I think, as we were talking about earlier, there's opportunities for innovation. At the same time, we have to be very sensitive and work closely with communities to determine really the best way to implement infrastructure for fleets.
Please, Michelle. Yeah, it looks like you went on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I completely agree with Annalisa. In addition, equity issues are just very important to consider all around. Just building equity into projects is very important to the planning, the design, and community engagement process of a project. It's going to require thinking about metrics and methods for providing direct, meaningful, measurable, and assured environmental health and economic benefits to all communities. Something that we're considering with every solicitation, every grant funding opportunity that is with our agency.
Great. Thank you. And then I'll just add that the zero emission vehicle market development strategy in there, equity is kind of the first principle. And equity in every decision, I think, is what it is. We have it in there. And there's also in development and equity engagement and implementation strategy that's coming out. And so the idea here really is to ensure that we are thinking about these things and that we are asking the right questions. And I think what we're finding is that in this first year of the strategy, of the equity engagement strategy, is really around just getting organized and understanding who's doing what, and getting a better handle on all the great work that's happening and the ways to think about these things, and more around community engagement. So, can stay connected, through GoBiz if you want to be involved more in that process as well. Okay, let's see. We have some questions coming through the chat. So I'm going to ask a couple here. We have about 10 more minutes. So let's see. We're thinking about how can California strategically, this is the question, how can California strategically locate infrastructure that leverages VGI to accelerate both distributed generation and EV adoption? We've touched on VGI, but we haven't really gotten too much into it. So who would like to jump in there? Is that Yulia maybe, or no?
Well, I'm certainly happy to jump in. We have done a lot of thinking about vehicle grid integration, especially lately. We actually issued a substantial decision in this area in December, where we have authorized utilities to conduct up to $35 million worth of VGI pilots. That's what our workshop is about in a couple of days. And we designated strategies and metrics moving forward that we intend to pursue to develop vehicle grid integration. So it's an interesting question of how that overlaps with infrastructure. On one hand, we just hope that folks will do simple things like smart charging, meaning respond to the price signals we provide, the time of use rates, and manage their charging to be away from the most stressed times for the grid. That's sort of the most basic form of VGI. But then as you get more advanced and you start doing things like V2G, that's vehicles exporting to the grid, or the intermediate step of vehicles supplying energy to the buildings or businesses that they are charging from. For example, during times the grid is stressed or during demand response events, the questions of infrastructure certainly come in. For example, right now there's quite a lengthy process for a vehicle to be approved to export to the grid. When we are looking at ways to streamline that is highlighted in our transportation electrification framework. But there are studies the utilities have to do to ensure that the infrastructure actually can handle the export, even though we've also been talking about whether the infrastructure can handle the charging or the electric demand. So in order to keep the grid stable, all of that has to be studied and sort of approved before folks can plug in. But at the same time, we proposed on May 25th a pretty radical idea of a dynamic locational rate that anyone will be able to sign up for if we approve it. This was the first of the staff proposal. And the idea there is that locations that have a pretty congested grid will be able to get more money for exporting out to the grid, or those customers may also experience sometimes higher prices, which will make it economic for them to use their own vehicles to supply their own demand at those most stressed times. So we are starting to think in more and more detail about how infrastructure and price signal and the price signals that we provide from that can impact customers' behavior.
And Gia, if I could just add on to that, because I think Yulia made an excellent point, is that a lot of people don't think of just time of use rates or rate structures as VGI, and they happen to be one of the most cost-effective VGI mechanisms that exist. And we tend to get focused on V2G, which I think has much more promising applications in the medium and heavy duty space. I'm not sure how much. I think V to home or V to business is really attractive, and I think Yulia and the PUC and the other regulators are working on that. But hydrogen is also a part of V2G. I just want to make, like, there's a storage application here that we could use to make the grid more efficient. And so there's always this kind of nexus between hydrogen electric fuel and electricity electric fuel. And so I think VGI is one of those places where the only thing that I would want to kind of emphasize here is I think there's a lot of excitement about like V2G or really more expensive forms of VGI. And what I would say is what we want to keep in mind is that these vehicles, these trucks, first and foremost are work trucks or buses. They have a job to do. The people who purchase them are not thinking, oh my gosh, how can I help make the grid more efficient? That is not, that plays no role in their purchase decision. And so as we look at how to utilize these vehicles in a way that benefits the grid and benefits all ratepayers and benefits the user themselves, we have to think about the value proposition to the person or the fleet who owns the truck or bus. And we can't just say, well, we need to implement this program and we need to require these fleets or whatever to abide by these rules without thinking about the fact that this is their livelihood. They buy these trucks because they want not just equal performance, but better performance than what they have now in their diesel vehicles. And so we want to make sure that V2G, VGI, that we really consider the value proposition from the customer's standpoint. Because we in the electricity world, we think grid. We got to make the grid more efficient. We got to make it more affordable. We got to make it more resilient. And all those things are really important. And medium and heavy duty vehicles can help with that. But they are not going to proliferate in the market if the customer doesn't absolutely love them and if they don't perform better than the technologies, the diesel technologies that they're currently used to. They've got to provide more benefits, and they certainly have the capacity to do so. So I want to caution us as we move down this VGI path to not be so focused on grid benefits to the exclusion of the customers, particularly in medium and heavy duty vehicles, where these vehicles literally are people's livelihoods. They're not just a car they drive. Their whole livelihood depends on this truck and how it performs.
Can I tag on to that for
Nico,
one point?
I was going to ask you, please, from the hydrogen perspective. Yep.
Well, tagging on a little bit to Eileen's comments and also Yulia's comments is that going back to that comment that people's livelihoods depend on this. What we often forget is the majority of the fleet of trucks out there is not owned by large fleets. I tried to get that across in my comments a little bit, but the majority of the fleets on the road are mom and pop outfits. They do not have time to adjust to fancy schemes, basically, because that if they can't, that means the end of their company, and they lose to the competition that continues to operate diesel and CNG. So especially in the early years, the VGI and the other options could work out very well and get things going, especially when you tie it into, like, say, truck share, for example, because there obviously is a time when the truck will be standing still somewhere in a location. And that's another thing about these small operators. They don't own real estate to park their truck. So this could be an opportunity for them to park their truck somewhere that currently they are looking for a different spot for every night, because they do not own any property and they may be towed if they park in the wrong spot. And in this case, they may be allowed to stay there. So that applies also to hydrogen a little bit, but in a different way. But I think they can still work very closely together. That's also why I said, like, let's break down silos and make sure that we're flexible all around to make this work, because there are some goals that we need to achieve, and we can't be too stuck at initially. And I realize there are rules we have to abide by, but we need to be very flexible and getting this going, because that's something I would say is later that we have to worry about later, and how the regulations, specific regulations that limit some of these things play a role, and we can adjust accordingly, because things will continue to change I expect for 10 years, 15 years ahead before we reach some kind of point of stability and some ability to predict what's going to happen.
So I see we're coming up on the top of the hour here. I'm going to squeeze in one more question before we wrap up. And this one is, how many heavy-duty chargers, this came in from the live Q&A, so how many heavy-duty chargers are operative right now? Let's throw in hydrogen stations, heavy-duty hydrogen stations as well. And how many will be needed to serve the full heavy-duty vehicle electrification program? And I suspect that it's not going to be a satisfying answer that's like, it's this many in this little box, but let's hear your thoughts on that. Michelle? Or Nico, you could go first if you want to talk about hydrogen.
Yeah, I kind of threw a number out there, but that really only applied to Class 8 fuel cell trucks. So we're looking at 100 till 200 by 2035 to at least meet the requirements that are set out and the targets that are set out in the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and the parallel Advanced Clean Fleet Rule to get things going. But that obviously is just a small, even though it's a significant fuel volume needed there, it just does not address the whole thing. So I hope that helps contribute to the questioner, answer his or her question, but it's just a small part of it. And it's rather a daunting task, literally, that we're up to. But I think splitting it up in specific areas, like I'm doing here for Class 8 heavy duty, at least gets you to the answer in the end, like what's needed and what all needs to happen.
Yeah, great.
And I would just add that the CEC has done some excellent work on this, and Cali TC has also looked at this in terms of the ACT rule and the light duty rules, and the answer is 1.7 million.
Great.
By 2030, that's not 100%. So, and that is the number that has, that includes hydrogen and medium and heavy duty and light duty vehicle infrastructure.
Yeah, I did want to jump in and say that does include all of the sectors. So just for medium heavy duty, I think that is a small proportion of that 1.7 million number, because we expect fleets to rely on most of their own charging and only somewhat on public charging, whereas light duty vehicles sort of need charging everywhere.
Well, I feel like we could go on and on, but I think we have to stop there for today. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of our speakers again for a great panel, and to those of you who are participating online. And thanks for the interesting questions and comments. We're going to take a break for an hour and begin the next panel at 1. So, and we'll hear more from the private sector partners in that session. So I know it'll be a really great session, and why don't you grab some lunch and then come on back and be ready to join us at 1 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Gia.
Thank you.